The Mexican government stated the so-called historical truth in the Ayotzinapa case was a construction of Enrique Peña Nieto's presidency. In Argentina, Foreign Minister Santiago Cafiero denounced U.S. role in the campaign of judicial persecution against Vice President Cristina Fernández. And in the UK, protesters gathered outside Britain's Houses of Parliament calling for people to boycott the new energy bill. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Luis Alberto Matos from the teleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. The Undersecretary for Human Rights of the Mexican Ministry of Interior, Alejandro Encinas, said Friday that the so-called historical truth was conceived under the government of former President Enrique Peña Nieto. In a new review of the report on the progress of the case of the 43 missing students from Ayotzinapa, Encinas explained that various officials participated in meetings headed by the federal executive at that time to operate the official version of the first disappearance of the students. The official pointed out that in many cases there are presumptions of alteration of the crime scene, of having created a truth based on acts of torture, and that the design of the so-called historical truth was carried out by the government of former President Enrique Peña Nieto.
We have made an analysis of the way, place, and circumstances of the intervention of different actors, and we have been able to determine how the criminal group Guerreros Unidos articulated with government authorities the disappearance of the students. We have established at all times that the authorities followed the students' movements, who were monitored from days before the mobilization that were going to take place on October the 2nd in Mexico City, and how they were aware of their departure from the teacher school, their arrival in Iguala, and the facts of the persecution and violence that preceded their disappearance, which evidently establishes not only the responsibility for the action and negligence, but the involvement of authorities and state agents in the disappearance of the students.
On Thursday in Brazil, Workers' Party presidential candidate Lula da Silva renewed his commitment to fight corruption and improve social investment, especially for the most vulnerable sectors. Lula said they will continue to create mechanisms to investigate corruption. He recalled that during his presidency, they passed the law of access to information and the transparency portal to fight corruption. Speaking about the country's most pressing issues, Lula said that investing in education is key to the development of Brazil.
I want to tell the Brazilian people that we have already proved that it is possible to take care of the Brazilian people. I don't like to use the word govern. I rather say take care, meaning to put the needs of the poor people in the country's budget, to try to enable people to go to the university. I'm proud of having gone down in history as the president who built the more universities and technical schools. We got Brazil with 3.5 million university students, and we left it with 8 million. In other words, this country has future, but we need to rebuild it. No country has ever become rich without investing in education.
Lula da Silva took advantage of a few minutes of his interview in O Globo, which gets financing from the agribusiness, to vindicate the movement of landless rural workers and emphasize that the movement is the largest producer of organic rice in the country.
The landless movement, or the MST, is doing an extraordinary thing. They are producing. You may know that they have several cooperatives and that they are the largest producer of organic rice in Brazil. You have to visit one of their cooperatives, and you will notice that the movement of 33 years ago no longer exists. But now Bolsonaro is deceiving ranchers about the MST, and he's freeing up weapons.
Thursday night, all over Brazil, people gathered together to watch former President Lula's first interview on the most popular national news program in over a decade. From Recife, our correspondent Brian Meir has more.
There's an old saying in Brazil that goes, if it didn't appear on Global TV Network's Jornal Nacional program, it didn't happen. Last night, Global TV which was created through grants from Brazil's sub-fascist military dictatorship and has been historically antagonistic towards the left, gave Lula his first interview in over a decade. Across the country, TV screens were set up for outdoor watch parties.
You can conduct serious investigations like they did in Korea with Samsung, in France with Alstom, and with Volkswagen in Germany. You investigate. If the businessman embezzles, you arrest and convict him, but you let the company keep operating. Here in Brazil, Operation Car Wash destroyed the engineering industry that took nearly a century to build.
By coherently and systematically responding to a series of at times hostile questions, Lula da Silva showed Brazil why he's leading by double digits in the presidential race, and why a conservative TV network like Globo would want to silence him for so long.
After 16 years without an opportunity to speak to the Brazilian people on Jornal Nacional, where he was systematically and unjustly accused of crimes and did a lot of damage, not just to Lula, but to the Brazilian people who deserve to know the truth.
Brian Mir, teleSUR, Recife.
Argentina's Foreign Minister Santiago Cafiero denounced the role of the United States in the judicial persecution against Vice President Cristina Fernández, in view of the recent interfering statements made by U.S. Senator Ted Cruz about the Vice President of the Republic. The head of Argentina's diplomacy expressed on his Twitter account that these actions showed that the process against former President Fernández is a judicial persecution driven by ideological interests born outside of Argentina. The campaign against the also senatorial candidate aims at her permanent political disqualification plus 12 years of imprisonment for alleged corruption crimes of which there are no evidence. Reconstruction work at the Super-Oil Tanks Depot in the western Cuban province of Matanzas continues. More than 700 tons of debris have been removed from the area where the unprecedented industrial accident occurred. Government officials headed by President Miguel Díaz-Canel toured the facility to oversee the process. Along with their reconstruction work, they are trying to resume the normal functioning of the plant. Local authorities explained that they already have 90% of the material necessary to build the first tank on site. Meanwhile, they are previewing other structures to decide which areas will be demolished and which ones will be preserved. Men and women are working around the clock, convinced that they will soon be able to reactivate the base, which they hope will be in better conditions than it was before. Let us take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back to From the South. In Colombia, the labor federations, unions, and the national government have reached a first agreement to achieve a labor reform, which might be ready by the end of this year. According to Labor Minister Gloria Inés Ramírez, the process of drafting the reform will begin in a few weeks, and it will involve employers, workers, labor unions, some international labor organizations, the Labor Chamber of the Supreme Court of Justice, and other international organizations. Rural employment and gender issues will be prioritized in the new reform. Colombia's government suspended aerial bombings targeting armed groups in an effort to minimize the death of civilians and children who have been forcibly recruited into the organizations. Defense Minister Iván Velázquez said the move was a symbol of the government's willingness to engage in future talks with armed groups. The defense minister also said that the new policy should not be mistaken for a sign of weakness on part of Gustavo Petro administration, emphasizing that peace is a process of collective construction. The decision marked a shift in the South American nation's strategy against illegal groups and drug trafficking gangs amid a recent uptick in violence, especially in remote parts of the country. In Peru, 2 people died and 17 others were injured during protests by informal miners in the Madre de Dios department in the southeast part of the country. The protests began after a military police raid in which boats and gold mining equipment were destroyed. In retaliation, demonstrators tried to take over a police station. That's when police opened fire, and that's when the 2 fatalities occurred. Later, demonstrators blocked sections of the Interoceanic Highway, which runs from the Peruvian coast to the Brazilian border. Protesters also burned down a police guard post. A redacted version of the affidavit used to secure the search warrant for former President Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago mansion was unsealed on Friday under a judge's order. The search warrant affidavit had led U.S. Magistrate Judge Bruce Reinhart to find probable cause that evidence of crimes would be found at Mar-a-Lago ahead of the August 8th raid. The document lays out the justification for the search at the Florida mansion by special agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The Justice Department previously submitted its proposed redactions to the document on Thursday, prompting the judge to agree to unseal the document on Friday by noon. Reinhart stated that releasing the affidavit in whole would reveal the identities of witnesses, law enforcement, and uncharged parties, as well as the scope and methods of the investigation. After receiving approval almost 2 months ago, Spain Parliament approved a groundbreaking equality bill known as the Only Yes Means Yes law. The legislation received the green light with 205 votes in favor and 141 against after passing its first reading by lawmakers in May. The new law represents a reform of the country's criminal code that now defines rape as sex without clear consent. Until now, rape victims needed to prove that they had been subjected to violence or intimidation. The issue was at the heart of the notorious 2016 rape of an 18-year-old woman by 5 men who called themselves the Wolf Pack. They were initially convicted of sexual abuse and not rape. That verdict led to huge nationwide protests demanding reform. In 2019, the Supreme Court overturned the verdict, convicting all 5 of rape and increasing their sentences from 9 years to 15 years each.
This law represents a paradigm shift, a complete paradigm shift. If there is no explicit consent from women, what is taking place is aggression. That is how clear it is, Your Honor. In this way, we are narrowing the scope for sexist interpretation of women's behavior. It is no longer a question of whether we wore our skirts too short or whether we closed our legs or not.
On Friday, people protested the rise in electricity prices in the UK as households in the United Kingdom face an 80% hike in electricity and gas bills, in a dramatic worsening of the cost of living crisis before winter as the country awaits a new leader. Regulator Ofgem said its energy price cap, which sets prices for consumers who are not on a fixed deal with their supplier, will increase from October 1st to an average of more than $4,000 per year from the current $1,900 rate. Worse is expected to come in January, when Ofgem next updates its cap, with average bills predicted to top $5,000 or more. Protesters gathered outside Britain's Houses of Parliament calling for people to join the Don't Pay UK campaign, which is encouraging people to refuse to pay their energy bills from October 1st. teleSUR would dedicate its coverage of the Football World Cup Qatar 2022 to the figure of Diego Armando Maradona, who accompanied our crew in the last 2 World Cups. With the football star, we also tour our continent with the show The Sur da Viajero. We want this tribute to have its own music. With that in mind, we invite you to compose a song for teleSUR's coverage of the World Cup Qatar 2022. It must be an original song, never recorded before or published in any media, and free of legal attachments. Record the song in any format, WAV, MP3, even with your cell phone, and send it as an attachment to comunicaciones@telesurtv.net with the following information: author's name, nationality, and name of the song. The closing date for the call entries is September 10th, 2022. A jury of prestigious musicians and composers from the region will select the winning piece. The prize will be the recording of the song, a video clip, and the wide diffusion of the work. 1 week after the closing of the call, teleSUR will announce the results. And we have more news coming up after the final show break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. Ukraine's largest nuclear power plant was disconnected from the nation's power grid for the first time in its history. Russian Defense Ministry said that Ukrainian armed forces continue to shell the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and the city of Enerhodar, where the plant is located. The ministry also stated that the continuous shelling of the critical infrastructure of the nuclear power plant damaged 3 of the 4 high-voltage lines connecting the nuclear facility to the national grid and undermined its safety, which could lead to a major nuclear disaster. Chief spokesman Igor Konashenkov also said that the Ukrainian military continues shelling of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant from positions located on the opposite bank of the Kakhovka reservoir.
The Ukrainian military continues the shelling of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant and the town of Energodar. Over the past day, Ukrainian artillery targeted the nuclear power plant area 7 times from large caliber cannons. The shelling was conducted from the Ukrainian military firing positions in the area of Nikopol, Marganets, Vyshtarasovka, Chervonogrigorovka, located on the opposite bank of the Kakhovka reservoir. The enemy's fire units were suppressed by return fire by the Russian Armed Forces artillery.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said on Thursday that Russia is committed to working on reconciliation in Syria.
Lately, some of our Western colleagues have been spreading information that under the conditions of conducting the special military operation in Ukraine, Russia has lost interest for Syrian reconciliation. Those statements are totally improper. They do not reflect our course of striving for all-encompassing Syrian reconciliation, including supporting your mission.
Fighting erupted between government forces and members of the Tigray People's Liberation Front in northern Ethiopia, shattering a 5-month truce and dealing a blow to peace efforts. Both sides have repeatedly blamed the other for a lack of progress towards negotiations to end the 21-month conflict in Africa's second most populous nation. The Tigray People's Liberation Front said government forces and their allies had launched a large-scale offensive towards southern Tigray. The government accused the TPLF of striking force, stating that Ethiopia's Air Force shot down a plane carrying weapons for the TPLF that had entered the country's airspace through Sudan. The March truce paused fighting in a war that began in November 2020 and allowed a resumption of international aid to Tigray. Supporters of the Just Stop Oil environmental activist movement damaged petrol pumps in London with hammers and glued themselves to the ground to protest against new oil and gas licenses being issued in the United Kingdom.
I am terrified about the climate and ecological emergency. I have my future ahead of me and I don't know what that future is going to be like.
I am desperately worried about the climate crisis and the lack of urgent action, but particularly I am really worried about the new gas and oil licenses that are going to get consent in October.
We need an emergency response from the government. We will stop doing these actions once we have a statement from the government that's meaningful.
On Friday, Pakistan's government declared an emergency state due to monsoon flooding it said had affected more than 30 million people. The National Disaster Management Authority said that more than 900 people had been killed this year, including 34 in the last 24 hours. As a result of the monsoon rains that began in June, officials say this year's floods are comparable to 2010's, the world's on record, when over 2,000 people died and nearly a fifth of the country was underwater. The annual monsoon is essential for irrigating crops and replenishing lakes and dams across the Indian subcontinent, but each year it also brings a wave of destruction. A statement from Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif's office said 33 million people had been badly affected by the flooding, while the country's disaster agency said nearly 220,000 homes were destroyed and 500,000 badly damaged. teleSUR English continues to grow. Its signal now reaches Europe. You can order from your cable dealer or tune it yourself. These parameters that you see on screen are in place since July 1st, and quite soon further changes will be implemented for the signals in the Middle East and Africa. Now more than ever, the world connects to us and our stories are heard in all the faraway nations. This news multi-platform will continue providing truthful content to oppose the hegemonic media's narrative and unfaithfulness to our audience. And like this, we have come to the end of this news brief. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also join us on our social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. And now you can also follow us on TikTok account at teleSUR English, in which you will be able to see news in different formats, news updates, and much more. For teleSUR English, I'm Luis Alberto Matos. Thank you for watching.